Hello.
We'll just wait for a few viewers to come in
Yeah,
and we'll start, yeah? Just
sounds good. Hmm, It's morning here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of Cakeology Online Learning. We have here with us Chrissie Boon. For all of those who don't know her, she is the owner of the Icing Inspiration. She teaches and hosts classes in Canada, creates custom cakes, and runs a small bakery, Sweets by Too Nice to Slice. Just love the name, Chrissy. It's so
Thank you.
interesting. Today,
Thank
she will
you.
be doing a demo on how to make Spanish style mosaic cookies with modeling chocolate floral accents. Welcome, Chrissy.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and it's really different and exciting to kind of reach all around the world from your phone, which is really cool. I'm going to flip the phone around and show you what I'm working on, and we'll have some fun. Okay. Thank you. Here we go. Bear with me. New phone. I think I can zoom in. There we go. Okay. So I have my sample cookies here. Let's move over a little bit more. My sample cookies here to show you. I'm sure I've never done a Facebook Live over Zoom before, but I'm sure it's up live the same way as anything else, I would think. So if you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments. My husband is here, and if I can answer them like live so that I need to talk about them or something, I will. And if there's something that I can't answer in the moment, I will come back and read through the comments and answer in the comments. Okay. So these are sugar cookies that I have baked off. I use a recipe easily found online called Cookie Monster cookie dough. It's literally the Sesame Street Cookie Monster cookie dough recipe. It comes up, it's what my mom used. It's what I have used my entire career making cookies. The only thing I do is I eliminate, it's either baking powder or baking soda in it, and I don't use any leavening agents so that it bakes nice and flat and doesn't spread. Okay, so it's a very simple recipe. 3/4 cups of butter, 1 cup of white sugar, 1 or 2 eggs, I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head, and 2.5 cups of flour. It's very simple, and it's, as long as you don't over mix it, it doesn't spread, it stays nice and exactly the shape you want it to. When I roll my cookies, I use cookie slats. So these are a set of slats that go on either side of my rolling pin. So I generally roll, depending on what it's for, at the white slat. So I roll out my cookie dough, and then when I roll out my cookie dough, my rolling pin will hit the slats, and my cookie dough won't be able to go any thinner than this. And it'll also mean that my cookie dough is even the whole way. Okay. I do often, the slats come in these particular ones come in 3 thicknesses. I either use the red or the white, depending on what the project is, for my cookies. And then I use the black if I'm going to top them with fondant, which is what these are. And I know a lot of people kind of shy away from the idea of topping their cookies with fondant. You 100% could flood these. I sometimes top cookies with fondant because For one, it's quick and it's easy and it's fast. But also because I use it as a little bit of a sales technique for people who don't like fondant or are afraid of fondant, or fondant has gotten a bad name. I use these to let them try fondant, and that gives them a taste. And literally at a wedding show, I will hand them a little cookie about this big. And while they're telling me how much they hate the taste of fondant, and they'll eat the little cookie about this big that is topped with fondant, and they'll go, "Ooh, this icing's nice." And I'll say that's fondant. Something about the combination of fondant and cookie is a really nice taste and texture combo. It does really go nice together. So I've cut out my cookies, baked these off. I didn't have a cookie cutter for this. I searched a honeycomb pattern online, and just printed off a single honeycomb, cut it out, and I hand cut my cookie dough. Unfortunately, this honeycomb, after I got it all baked, I realized it's not quite 100% even. So depending on which way you turn my cookies, this side is longer than some of the others. So it didn't make for perfectly matching cookies all the time, but you can see that they are fairly close. And if I would have printed a cookie cutter, I do have a 3D printer, I would have done the math and got the exact size and stuff like that. You can see how little they spread and how straight their lines are. They would have met very perfectly. This one might be a little bit better. Okay, but you can see this side is shorter, so it's not quite. It's just from my handmade template. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover them in fondant. To do that, I coat the tops with just a little bit of piping gel. Okay. This piping gel is nice and smooth. You could coat it with a little bit of water if the piping gel wherever you are is pretty thick, or you could water down some piping gel. This is a pretty thin piping gel, so it goes on nice and smooth. You don't want a lot because you don't want it squeezing out from underneath your fondant. We'll do 3. Okay, that's too much. Let's put it on with an angled spatula. You can tell I've had dust around because there's little flecks of blue dust in my cookie. And we'll do one more. And then to cut out the fondant, I'm going to use the exact same template I used for the cutting the cookie, which is kind of the nice thing. If you're using a cookie cutter, you would just use the exact same cookie cutter you used to cut the fondant, the cookie out. You would use that exact same cookie cutter. So put these down here. So I have my fondant. It doesn't matter what fondant. I am using Renshaw, but whatever is readily available to you. Modeling chocolate would taste lovely as well. Okay. Oop. I'm gonna shake the table while I roll, I guess. So I have my cookie slats here. Normally I would roll in a large space, but I'm gonna try and show you how they work. And I normally wouldn't roll in such a small space. Take off my bracelet. Not normally a jewelry wearer, but apparently I am today. Okay, so I'm gonna roll, and I'm losing my cookie slat. See, normally I work in a larger space, but when you're on camera, you got to work in this tiny little screen. And I am rolling on a non-stick board, so I can be fairly confident that as I roll, it's not going to stick. I can release. If it is sticking, you can use a little bit of cornstarch or corn flour or icing sugar, whatever your preference is. I very much believe you do what works for you. There's no right or wrong answer. There we go. So see, the fondant stays exactly the thickness of these. It can't go any lower because the rolling pin can't press lower than these. So I'm just going to take my little template here with an X-Acto knife, or this is a sharp palette knife. And cut out all my honeycomb shapes. And then, like I said, because my template wasn't perfectly even on all sides, I do have to kind of look and see which side is the longer side. And then this will just stick right down. I kind of butt it up against the edges of the cookie. If your cookie was really, if you're struggling to have cookies that baked evenly, when it's just come out of the oven, you can take a sharp knife and trim it down, or you can even trim it down while they're fairly fresh. You don't need, it won't hurt it. You'll get still a nice sharp edge if you do the cookie while it's fresh. Let's see if we can get 2 more out of this. Yeah. And if you wanted to, with a fondant smoother, if you find your fondant isn't going on very smooth, you could also give it a quick buff on top with a fondant smoother. Okay, so we have number 2. Always looking for that wider edge. Okay. It's just a nice, especially when you get into kind of like a production line. So if you're doing a lot of cookies and you do 100, you roll out all the cookies at once, you cut out all the fondant at once. Okay, oops. If there's any questions I can answer for you, just like I said, pop them in the comments and Justin will let me know. Okay, last one, and then we will start making some flowers and painting our cookies. And if it was really too big and overhung for some odd reason, you could always trim the fondant. There we go. It's 3 covered cookies. I have a couple covered from earlier. It is a little bit easier to paint when the fondant has set up a little bit. But from here, actually, let's do our flowers first. Just get those out of the way. The one type of flower. The other ones I do as I put them on. But we're going to do just a little gum paste succulent. A simple one. These guys. Okay. And for that, I have some gum paste tinted with gooseberry. And this one has the tiniest bit of purple in it, actually. I'm going to roll out my fondant. Now, succulents are a very thick petal. So the nice thing, as opposed to having to worry about getting your petals super thin if you're making a rose, is that this is going to stay fairly thick. See that there? Okay, these are the FMM 5-petal rose cutters. Any 5-petal rose cutter will do. What I like about the FMM one is that little cute little point. It's very much like the point of a succulent, but any 5-petal rose cutter will do. I'm gonna give it a good push, give it a wiggle so it cuts clean. And I'm doing one of all 3 of my sizes here. And if I remember correctly, they are 40 millimeter, 50 millimeter, and 65 millimeter. Okay, and they come in all different sizes. These are obviously pretty tiny succulents for what we're doing, but if you want to make something bigger, you could. Now, I am not going to just leave it like this. Whenever I'm working with something, whether it's for a competition cake, and I know you guys have your competition coming up, or it's for a customer, I never want to leave it just straight out of the cutter. I was saying the other day, the only thing I think I'd leave this straight out of the cutter for if I was doing like a 70s themed cake, but otherwise I want to manipulate it and make it look custom. For these, normally I would ball tool the edge of a petal to give it a nice thin edge, but because this is so thick, if I start to ball tool the edge of this, it's going to press in and you're going to have a ridge line. So I thin these by just pressing them through my fingers. And then I also just pull slightly to a little point so that you can see from one petal to the next that I've made it unique. It's not just the shape right out of the cutter. Okay. Two, all the way around. And if your hands are sticking, you can always use some shortening, some cornstarch. I like to use shortening whenever possible over cornstarch because I find it doesn't dry out the paste quite as much. Okay. And I am sticking a little. And then I'm going to take a Dresden tool. I'm just going to put a line in from the top of the petal down into all 5 petals. Okay. And I like to give them a little bit of a pinch closed yet. And then I'm going to pop this into a piece of foam to dry right down the center. And I like to manipulate them a little bit. They're not bad where they fell, but they do often have like a little bit of a pinch. Maybe not all of them, but on some of them, give them a little pinch. We're going to do the same with the other 2. So this is the next size. Flatten them a little bit and pull up. Flatten. Pull up. On the cookies here, I have some small ones and some large ones. The large ones were made with all 3 layers, like I'm doing now, and the small ones were made with just the 2 smallest layers. They are kind of, it's meant to be like a cookie centerpiece, right? Like if you're packaging these and selling them, you might want to do a small little floral accent on each one. But for the sake of display purposes, these guys laid between the cookies. So my paste is sticky enough right now that I don't need any glue, I can tell. But if this wasn't sticky enough, you would just get a paintbrush and put a tiny little bit of water in between. It doesn't need much. And when I lay this in, the petals are going between the other petals. I want them all to be visible, so you don't want to lay them right straight on top. Just press down to connect. And now I can come back in like I did with the other one with my Dresden tool and manipulate a few of them so that they sit up higher. Give them some interest. If this was a bigger flower that you were working with, if you decide to work on a really big one, you would want to take some little tiny pieces of foam and stick them in underneath the flower petals so that they dry, and then before you go and put it on your cookie or your cake, pull the foam out so you know it's dry. And stick the last guy in really quick. With some gold sparkle. You're sparkling. There's always sparkle in my kitchen. Gold or silver or glitter. Find it everywhere. Okay. Vein these really quick. And then I'm just gonna set them aside to dry. They do take longer to dry than normal because of their thickness, but they're also not as delicate. So you could still work with them when they're a little bit wet, putting them on a cake or whatnot. I'm gonna finish this off. And again, those went in between. Like the last one. I'm going to finish this off by putting a few little handmade petals in the center. So for those, I'm just going to take a tiny, tiny piece of paste. A little ball. I like to roll it in the palm of my hand so you get a nice round ball, no seams. Whoop. Drop it. And then press down on one side so that I get a teardrop. And I squash it flat with the palm of my hand. And put the tiniest little vein in it, just like that. Okay. And then these little guys are going to go in the center. I usually do about 3. Our petals are odd numbers because they're 5s. So if I can fit 5 in, I'll put 5 in. If not, I do 3. I like to do odd numbers. 2. You can always guide it in with the tip of your Dresden tool or the tip of a toothpick. 1 more. And then we'll set this aside to dry. And I'll show you how to paint the cookies. There we go. And that one goes in here. So I bet you I could already pick this up because of the thickness of it without it worrying about it falling apart too much. You wouldn't be able to do that if you had all your tiny little delicate rose petals. But like I said, succulents are a very thick looking flower. Okay, so I'll put that aside to dry. And now we're going to look at our painted cookies. So when I paint these, I do sit and line them up, decide which ones I want where, get an idea of where they're going to end up sitting. Something like that. Okay. And then get that out of the way. I'm going to get my dusts. I am using 4 different shades of blue. So I have Forget Me Not by Sugar Art. And any shades obviously will do, any brand will do. These are just what I happen to have. And I wanted kind of a light to a dark range. This is Hyacinth by Squire's Kitchen. Ooh, dropping it. And my last one is Hydrangea by Squire's Kitchen. Okay. And then I have my bottle of Everclear, so a high proof alcohol. You could also paint with various lemon or vanilla extracts. I'm not going to pour this right into the dust to make a paint. I'm going to pour this into the holes beside it. Okay. And then I have my paint brushes, which these are the sugar paint brushes. They're nice and thin, so that's why I like to use them. But really, as long as you have a good quality sugar press, not Sugar Art, sugar press brushes. As long as you have a good quality, nice fine brush, you can use anything you like. I'm gonna sit, so excuse the noise of my chair for a minute. Okay, so I'm gonna start with my lightest color. I'm gonna dip into the alcohol and then dip into the dust to start to make a paint here. And the reason I don't make a paint out of the whole thing is because sometimes I want to have different consistencies. So I can make a little bit of paint here on the side. It can get really, really, really liquid. I can pull a little bit more dust in it. I can make one that's a little bit thicker for different areas. So I can kind of control the consistency of my paint a little bit better than if I just dumped a whole cap full of dust into there. It can often be very daunting to start. And before you start putting in all the lines and stuff like this, I often sit there looking at it going, oh gosh, I hate this. This is not going to look good. But it's as you add all the little details that it starts to come together. So in this particular painting, and I was kind of going for the look of the blue painted Spanish tiles or the blue and white pottery. And I did search some images and kind of look at a pattern that was right on a vase, and I copied the pattern on the vase. So I'm going to start with just kind of little ball like teardrops. Okay. And I had these kind of all over the place in sets of 2 or 3. The only thing I kind of really think about is as I'm painting, where is the stem naturally going to fall? So I look at where the stem of this is going to, before I move on, I look at where the stem of this is going to go. And it's either going to come up and out this way, or maybe it's going to bend and come down. So I want to make sure that I'm not sticking another flower or something somewhere where it doesn't make sense that the path of this stem would go to. So maybe we'll put, if the stem was going to come up here and come around, maybe we'll put another set of little buds here. Okay. This does dry very quickly. So I always work, if I can, because I'm right-handed, from my left to my right. But once we come back to add in all the detail, you won't have an issue going over it. Okay, and now I'm gonna maybe do a big flower. Do my big flower here. I start with the top, and again, it's gonna look so kind of childish. It's gonna look like, oh my gosh, did my 5-year-old son draw that? But it will work in the end when we add all the little details, okay? So I'm gonna go up, and I'm gonna paint little bumps, just like I'm painting like kids when I would draw what I thought was a tulip as a child. Okay, I'm gonna fill that in. When you start to add the definition lines, you'll see the flower come to life. Okay. And now when I do all my petals, I do try to use a different consistency. This is a little bit thicker. I do try to use a different consistency on the side petals, just slightly, so that you can see the definition between them. So I'm going to go a little bit. You'll see them when you paint them, when you outline them, but just for some interest, a little bit thinner. Make a little bump. These ones are narrower petals. Okay, one on each side. Like I said, it looks so juvenile. But when it all comes together and you start outlining it, you see the flower come together. Now we're going to do one from the bottom. I said any dust color will work if you want to add in metallics. Just remember, in this case, it's not something that if you're using a metallic that isn't edible. This is obviously an edible piece. This is not an accent on a cake that can be removed. This is an edible piece. So you do want to make sure you're using an edible metallic if you're going to paint on cookies, because these definitely, the whole thing will be consumed. I'm going to do the bottom petal. I'm going to try and put out some of those brush strokes in there. I don't like them. I say I don't like them at this point, and then when all is said and done, I look back and I think the brush strokes kind of make it. They kind of give it that painted feel. So I don't hate them after. I just don't like them while I'm doing it. That's how it always goes. I'm going to put one more little trio down here, and then we're going to add in some leaves and start to outline things. And it's one of those things that I feel like the more you add, the nicer it looks. I sat here the other night painting the sample set, and I just kept going and going and going and going. And it was really enjoyable because you start off and you're like, I don't know if I love this. And then all of a sudden it starts coming together. So we're going to go with this hydrangea blue for some leaves. And I like to carry different things over the side of each cookie. And that's why I paint them sitting as a set. So that if you have a piece that splits, let's do a leaf. Let's think about that line. We'll do a leaf here. And if it comes over the cookie, you just keep going. Okay, fill it in. Just keep filling the whole thing in. And oftentimes I do them in sets of 2. It's funny, I always make sure like normal petals are even numbers, but this whole thing has been sets of 2 are odd numbers. This whole cookie set has been even numbers. Isn't my normal go-to. And see how you can add different layers of thicker paint to kind of change the look of the petal. I like this color. Oops, dipped in the wrong color. And maybe I do different shaped ones. So I'm going to think that there's a stem maybe coming down here, and I'm going to do a nice big leaf. Kind of funny shaped leaf to come off a stem down here. Fill it in. This is obviously a smaller set. I'm still going to try to get lots of detail, but I won't keep you all day watching me paint these guys on. Maybe we'll do one here. If you're finding your paintbrush gets really thick with paint, I will dip it in and then I will roll it on the side. Kind of takes off a little bit of the excess and also thins out the brush. Do another leaf with this guy. Yes, stick one more leaf up in the corner because I will feel like it looks unfinished if I don't, and then we'll start outlining them. Ooh, I picked up a lot of paint that time. One set up here. And then we're gonna take our, which one was that? Hyacinth blue and outline everything. So you can see I really looked for different shades, ones that are quite different from each other and like noticeable. I want you to be able to tell that we've used different colors here. I didn't want it to be all one wash of the same color blue. I know oftentimes you'll have, if you're quoting wedding cakes, a bride will come in and say, here's my color swatch, please make sure to match it perfectly. And I always tell them that it's better if you have your decor and your flowers and everything in various shades of the same color as opposed to everything being the exact same shade, because it's more pleasing to the eye to have multiple colors of the same shade than this kind of wash of one color. So this is a super, 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 super fine tip brush, if you can see that. And we'll start with this flower. Actually, my big flower, I do put a center in, and I use that hydrangea blue to put a round center in. There's no right or wrong. You can do whatever you like. It's my center. And now we're going to take that hydrangea blue, this hyacinth blue, and we're going to start to outline things. And these can be very kind of artistic strokes. They don't have to be these perfect lines because you want it to look like a painting, right? You want that handmade feel. I don't mind if it gets thicker in some places and thinner in other places. If my brush stroke isn't perfectly clean, I often kind of cross my eyes and look at the piece. I don't know what it does, but it kind of gives me a better feel for what I'm looking at. I carry these little lines up, give it almost like a stamen in the center. It's very like, as you get going, it's very freeing. It's just however you want it to be, and you'll start adding more and more lines. And it's such simple strokes and simple paint. It's not like you're mixing up something crazy. It's a little bit of dust and alcohol. Or like I said, you can use an extract. Everything is very simple lines. And as you do it, you start to see the flower come out, and it still looks very childish. There we go. But you see this really kind of reminds me of like the Alice in Wonderland talking flowers. We're going to add a stem to it, and that's when I just start to go crazy with the curly cues and the stems. Okay, and whatever I do, I carry across the cookies. This is one where you want to make sure that point of your brush is really nice and thin. And I'll add in twists and turns. Okay. Outline your leaves, but let the brush strokes, oops, too much water. Let the brush strokes carry into the leaves, not just, let's see, my paint got too thin on me there. I need to have something on the end of my brush. There we go. We can always fix it. I try to work with what I have done as opposed to redoing. If I can, if I like it. I mean, if I ruin it, that's one thing. Okay. I know it's dipping in a lot with this one into the paint, but because the brush is so tiny, it doesn't hold much of anything. Let's see. Some like kind of vein lines in the center of these guys. And then the more they join, I think the more interesting they are. Although moving the cookie around becomes quite difficult because you have to remember exactly which cookie goes where. And I moved these cookie sets around several times to try and get different pictures. And it was like a jigsaw puzzle. Little kind of side guides. So it's just enjoying it and keep adding to it. And the more you add to it, more curly cues off the sides. The more you add to it, you'll start to see the more you like how it's coming together. I always, like I said, I always hate it in the beginning. And just because I did my light colors in the beginning doesn't mean I can't go, oh, you know what, there's a leaf missing there, there's a petal missing there. You can always go back and add more. And I was like, this one is clearly not as full as my other sample one is of painted spots. But you can go back and add and go, okay, I need more flowers in here, or as you get going, you'll start to get a feel more leaves or whatever you want. Do some up there. Don't do what I'm doing though. Like I said, go left to right if you can. This stuff is drying very, very, very quickly, but you still don't have to play quite such a balancing act with your hand if you know for certain things are dry. Okay. And it's all, you could also do this with edible markers. I would probably be more inclined to hold each cookie a little bit more individually though. I think if I'm working with an edible marker, I need to hold it a little bit closer to me to do it. But you definitely could use, and I do have some right behind me here. You definitely could use the rainbow dust or the various, let's see, markers out there. This is a drip color marker, these ones, and they have a brush end. So if you wanted to use that instead, you felt you had a little bit more control or didn't want to have to worry about the time of dipping in to paint all the time, okay, you could use something like that. Continue your lines. The markers are definitely easier to draw with when your fondant is set up a little bit, okay? You don't want to have your fondant too fresh. The brush lines are not bad, but if you're doing a rainbow dust marker and you're trying to use this end, the really fine end, the fondant definitely has to be really nice and set up. This end will go okay, but the thin end, you'll just poke right into the fondant. Okay, so, I mean, it's not done. I would add a lot more to it. But I can also look at my blank spaces as where I'm going to put my accents of my succulents. So let's do that, because we are, about 10 after 9-ish. And I want to show you adding the rest of my little flowers here. But you get the idea, right? It just goes from all of a sudden it's a little blue blob to you start adding all your little details and wisps and stuff, and it really starts to take some life. I have a filter on my phone that lets me see this exact thing in like all different colors of the rainbow, and it really kind of gave me an idea of what it would look like in purples or pinks, and it was really nice. Made me want to paint my daughter's, like the one I did that was really kind of like a burgundy color when I changed it to that. So okay, so this is modeling chocolate. And modeling chocolate would be my actual go-to for the ones that are going to sit on the cookie if I was going to serve the cookie over gum paste, just because they'd be a lot more tasty and enjoyable to eat. It's very soft, this modeling chocolate. It is satinized modeling chocolate, and I do find it very soft. So with that, I found I can't use a cutter quite the same as I can with the gum paste. So the ones that I have to use a cutter on, I've used the gum paste. But these individual ones, I'm going to make a teardrop, press it flat. But I do find I have very little working time because the heat of my hands makes them go soft real quick. So you can see just sitting in my hand, it's gone shiny. And it is cold where I am. So this modeling chocolate was really warm. I mean, really hard. Now it's really warm. So I've just done the same teardrop I did for those center ones. And I start to place them. Let's go with right here in this empty space, right on the cookie. I don't need any glue or anything. They are warm. They will stick. Okay. And press. My hands are a little bit blue from painting. Press. And these ones are just all individually hand formed little buds. Pinch at the bottom a little, gives them a little bit more shape. Try to get 5 in there. Because they are succulents, there's no like I said, you're not going for this super thin petal. So it's kind of nice. All good? Oh, my husband's back.
Charmaine was wondering if you could use brighter pens for the finer lines.
So I show maybe she asked it just before I showed it. Justin just came back. He was here earlier, went off to deal with our kids waking up for the day. But yeah, I did pull out the pens and show them that.
Okay.
It's one thing though that those really fine lines, like I said, with the rainbow dust pen, if you want to use the really fine line of the rainbow dust pen, you definitely have to let the fondant sit up a little bit longer. It would be harder to paint with, but those brush stroke pens, the drip color pens, the 3 of these cookies are soft from this morning, and they write on it no problem. Because the thing is, you have to think about it like, say you're trying to write with a ballpoint pen on a piece of paper on the table versus a piece of paper sitting on your lap. When your lap is soft and you try to write with a ballpoint pen on your lap, the pen just wants to press through the paper on your lap. So you do need to have a bit of a firm surface when the pen is so pointy like that. But the drip color ones, they're more like painting with the end of a paintbrush. So that can glide across the top of the fondant. Any other questions right now? I'm almost done this little flower. I think I might just end it with 3 there. And then I do just like I did with the gum paste one, some tiny, tiny, tiny ones. My modeling chocolate is getting quite warm now, and stick them right in the center. And the last thing I did on these was I used, I'm really into gardening right now, and I like watching all the new growth and the little buds, and I find it very fascinating. Mother Nature is amazing. So I'm going to put on these little kind of as if there's these new growth buds. And in some cases I had them come out of here. At first, when I started putting this on, I went, oh, the green doesn't match the blue. But my point of the whole look was like kind of some flowers growing up through the Spanish tiles. And then as you start to put it in different areas and stuff, it starts to come together. So for this, I am using gum paste because I don't find I can get the modeling chocolate line quite so thin without the heat of my hands making a mess of it. If you have colder hands, you might be more successful. I've rolled a tiny little strip and it's narrower at one end. This may not stick exactly. You might have to add it with some water. And I will just get a little brush and do that just in case. So you may just have to stick it down with a little bit of water. And I like these to be kind of like the curly cues that are growing out, kind of mimicking the same curly cues that we're painting on. But then I take some pink modeling chocolate and I use tiny, tiny, tiny little spots. I roll these tiny teardrops and I don't press them down yet the way I was in my hand before. I pick them up with my Dresden tool. This one I'm going to have to turn because I do want these to go on in the way that I see them growing, which is from, I didn't quite glue it on well enough there. From, so that the bulbous end data and Wi-Fi. That's something that's gotta, yeah, I'm sticking to everything right now. And as they go up the stem, I do try to make them smaller and smaller and smaller. And this might be too where you go, okay, now that I see my succulents are going on and my my flowers are going on, you might want to go back and go, okay, now I can see that I need a little bit of blossoms more here. Okay. Part of the reason I also start with my light colors first to my dark colors is that it saves me from having to use a different brush for every color. I can start with my light and go to my dark and use the same brush because I'm just adding a little bit of light color to the dark. It's a little bit harder to go the other way around, but I did just do that now. And you can see it's a slightly different shade of blue than the other ones. They also dry different, but it is, it works. It's not so different that you're going to be in trouble, that it looks odd. And you can see how fast, I don't know if you can see that on the camera, how fast the alcohol dries. These puddles of paint are already dry. So if anybody has any other questions, that's kind of it. From here, I would just keep playing and adding and seeing what I want to change and crossing my eyes so they go a little bit blurry to see where I need to fill in spots. That's my go-to, and it's probably not the healthiest thing to tell you to do. But my other go-to is to take a picture from my phone and look at my cake or my cookies through that photo. And that gives me a little bit of a better idea of what I need to add. It's kind of like getting a different perspective. You can see what's missing. You can see where there's some empty spaces. Okay. There we go. Now, normally I would flip this around and there'd be like, you'd be able to see the Facebook
See, they
question.
look so beautiful.
Thank you.
We have somebody asking, what are the colors that you have used?
Okay, so it is, oops, I'll flip it around and show you one more time.
Yeah.
So this is flip, come on, flip.
Mm-hmm. That's okay, you can show them.
There we go. Okay, so Forget Me Not is from the Sugar Art.
Okay.
Okay, and that was the lightest one. The darkest one was Hyacinth from Squire's Kitchen.
Right.
And this one has almost like a greeny teal color to it, is Hydrangea from Squire's Kitchen.
Okay. Very nice colors.
Okay.
Pretty unusual. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can see there where I've added, like, this guy's a lot more little bits and pieces as you went, right?
When you use piping gel to stick the fondant on the cookies, does
Yes.
it become a little soggy? Would it become
No,
very
it doesn't. No, not at all. And it actually sets up enough that, here, I have this one.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can break it. You don't even really see, because I use so little, I don't know if it'll zoom in enough. Because I use so little, I just broke this one. There's no piping gel squeezing out. This one was covered the other day, so I don't know if I can peel the fondant off. But the piping gel almost sets up. So you can kind of see, let's see. You can see there's almost nothing there anymore, right? It sets up firm, and that's the one thing. If you use too much of it, it definitely gets squishy, and I don't like the texture in my mouth if it gets squishy like that. But if you use just a nice thin coat, it just holds it, and that's it.
That's it. And can you give us a quick modeling chocolate recipe?
I use the Wilton Candy Melts, and they come in a bag like this. So that's 340 grams, 12 ounces. And I use a third of a cup of corn syrup. And I heat the corn syrup. I totally melt the candy melts. And then I mix the two together. And that's it. I'll let it sit overnight, but you want to make sure it's really, really, really incorporated.
Okay.
But otherwise, I love the Renshaw modeling chocolate. If you can find some out there. The Satin Ice modeling chocolate is really nice. The Satin Ice is a little bit warm. If you have really hot hands, it's a little bit more difficult to handle because it does melt faster. The Cocoa Berry Calibo one is really nice. But I'd say it's kind of, if you have hot hands, it's your go-to because it's really hard. It's really firm to start with.
Right. Okay. I think that's it. Those
Awesome.
were the questions that came up. And thanks a lot, Chrissie, for this wonderful demonstration. They look so, so beautiful.
If you have any other questions, you can always pop them in the comments after, and I will continue to watch and answer any questions later.
That's fabulous. I'm sure they would. I mean, there are a lot of people who watch later.
Yes. Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.
Bye.